Hello everyone and welcome to another YouTube video. As you all know, I'm the president of the Anish Giri fan club and I also played Anish a couple times in the past. I have quite a few losses against Anish, but we're not going to look at those. In this video I'll show you my one and only over the board win against our boy Anish. So Anish started things off with the move d4, I played knight f6, c4 and I played g6. So if Anish would have played the move knight c3, the main move, I would have played d5. This is called the Grunfeld defense, but Anish played the move g3. This is the fianchetto. So I played bishop g7, played bishop g2, and I played c5. So I'm aiming for more of a Benoni approach. He played d5, and I played e6. And actually, I found out that this move is actually inaccurate because white can take on e6. And now the thing is, usually you want to recapture with the d-pawn, but the problem is that white will exchange the queens, and now my king is stuck in the center because I cannot castle anymore. So here white will play knight c3 followed by bishop f4 on castles, after which white has a pretty nice advantage. So, but fortunately Anish did not do that. He played the move knight to c3, took d5, here we captured, I played d6, and here we get into the normal Benoni. So Anish played knight to f3, castles, castles, and rook to e8. And this is really what we call the tabia of the fianchetto Benoni. White has a lot of options here. There's a4, there's h3, there's rook e1, there's bishop f4, knight d2 is a move. But Anish chose the main move, which was bishop to f4. And now it's black's turn. Black has a lot of options here. There's a6 you can play, there's h6, there's bishop f5, there's knight e4, there's knight h5. But I chose the move knight to a6, which is also one of the main moves. And to a beginner, this move might look weird. You know, you put your knight on the rim. But very often the idea is to go knight to c7 and b5, gaining space on the queen side, which is one of the main ideas in the Benoni. So I just played rook to e1, and I played bishop to g4, h3, and I traded the bishop for the knight. Not ideal, but very often black has one piece too many in the Benoni, and this will give me a bit more space to move my pieces. So I played knight to c7, preparing to move b5, but this move is actually an inaccuracy. And Anish should have played the move e4, and I cannot stop the move e5 properly, because now if I go knight to d7, Anish will just take the pawn on d6. Instead, he played the move a4, stopping b5. So I played rook b8, trying to prepare it. And here once again, he could have played the move e4, and it's tough for me to stop the move e5. But instead, Anish played queen to d2, played a6, and now here he misses his last chance once again. If white goes e4, black's in a tough spot, e5 is coming, especially now with the rook being on b8. There's always the potential the deck could be hanging, so this is quite an unpleasant position for black. But fortunately, Anish chose the move rook e to b1, and now I get in b5, the break I've been preparing for. So Anish took, I take, and he played the move b4, which is what he was planning, but he might have underestimated my reply. I took in b4, and now here the problem for white is that generally you want to recapture with the rook, and go rook a to b1 and put pressure on this b5 pawn. But here black can strike with the move knight f takes d5. And it looks like white is lost, because if white takes, I take, and if white takes, I pick up the exchange. But white still has a defense. After knight f takes d5, white can play bishop takes d5, I play knight takes, white plays queen takes, I take on c3, and this looks winning for black. I hit this rook, but white has the move rook to a7. And now I should not capture the rook, because then I'll get checkmated. So white keeps the balance with the move rook to a7, and black would have to play something like, you know, rook e7, retrade, white picks up the pawn, and you know it should be a draw. But instead of all that, Anish did not recapture on b4. He played the move knight to a2. Planning to recapture the knight on b4. But here I had the move knight to e4, hitting the queen and now I open up the attack on the rook on a1. So Anish took, I recaptured. Anish took on b4. He simply cannot, the rook is simply trapped in the corner, so he took the pawn. I took an a1, and he played knight to c6. So creating a fork of his own, hitting the queen, hitting the rook. But the problem is I played queen to e8. I sidestep and now I put pressure on the pawn on e2. So Anish took my rook, and I dropped back the bishop. I don't want to take the knight on b8, because then white takes on a1, and materials equal, and white actually has an advantage because d6 is weak. But I go bishop to e5, and now white is in a bit of a tough spot. So the knight is hanging, and if white takes on e5, I recapture with the rook, and if knight to c6, I take on d5, and there's a lot of stuff hanging in white's position. So Anish chose the move knight to c6, retreating the knight. But here I first ruin white's pawn structure, and then I take on e2. So here my pawn up, d5 is weak, all these pawns are weak as well. So here black's in very good shape. Anish played the move queen to b4. I took this pawn, queen takes e6, and knight c3, hitting the rook on b1. So Anish played rook to a1, I played rook to e6. Anish played queen to d8. We traded the queens, and I played rook to b6, putting my rook behind the passed pawn, planning to push it up the board. Anish played rook a8. Now here you should not push the pawn. I know you're tempted to, but there's knight e6 checkmate. Covering this square, king's in check. Always be careful of such moves. So I played king to g7, stepping out of the discovery. Rook a7, hitting the pawn. So I played rook to f6, rook b7. And now this might look like a free pawn. I know you're tempted to take it, but that's bad. He goes knight to e6, and suddenly you're in a world of trouble. You cannot take, because that puts your king in check, so you're going to lose the rook. Sag. So I played the move king to f8. Played rook c7, hitting the knight, but now I pick up another pawn with a check. Played rook to c8. Once again, I stepped out of the discovery. White didn't have any real threats, but just didn't want to allow any tricky business. Anish played h4, and I just went pawn hunting. Knight to d3, king e2, take another pawn, rook b8, knight e4. Now I'm up 3 pawns, and white cannot take the pawn on b5 because that allows a fork on the king and the rook. So instead he played the move king to e3. I played knight d6, king d4, knight f5, king e5, and now picking up another pawn. Now white once again cannot take the pawn, because then rook f5, I pick up the rook. So instead he played the move rook to c8, I gave a check. You know, repeating once. You know, draw against Anish is a nice result, so I just decided to repeat the moves. Just kidding, I played h5, going for the win, of course. I mean, I'm up 4 pawns. Rook c5, I gave a check. Went here, I gave another check, and brought the knight back. And after knight c6, knight e4, Anish decided to resign. Once again, I'm up 4 pawns. And I mean, he would have to retreat the rook. I just pushed this pawn on the board. The situation is just hopeless. So yeah, that was my only win against Anish. I've lost many, but yeah, this is the only over the board game I ever won against him. So hope you all enjoyed the video. Even you, Anish, leave a like, leave a comment. I'm looking forward to seeing what our boy has to say, and I will see you all in the next one.